Hello and welcome. Today we'll be diving into section 5.2 of the first edition of the Standard for Change Management published by the Association of Change Management Professionals. This is perfect if you're prepping for the Certified Change Management Professional exam or if you just want to deepen your understanding of change. So thanks for tuning in. Let's dive into the 7 sections of formulating the change management strategy. To start, develop the communications strategy. The purpose of develop the communication strategy is to create a strategy that when executed, ensures that the organization and its customers are aware of and understanding the organizational rationale for the change. It ensures that stakeholders are aligned regarding the program's expected value and benefits to the organization, initiation, progress, challenges, achievements, completion, and realized benefits. The communication strategy includes the defined business rationale or case for change, stakeholders and sponsors, identified audiences, audience segmentation and audience needs, targeted stakeholder messaging, identified communication channels and messaging frequency, identified feedback channels and loops, and communication governance and review process. The communication strategy should include the business rationale for what, why, who, how, and when changes are taking place. It should provide the information in detail necessary to enable change sponsors and the target audience to understand the key messages, channels, and frequency that the messages will be delivered during the change execution. Successful communication of the case for change occurs when business rationale communications are sufficient enough that each type and level of stakeholder can clearly articulate what is changing, how the change benefits or affects the organization, and how the change affects him or her individually, often referred to as "what's in it for me." If people see progress they can relate to, then they are more likely to continue the change effort and help to reach the future state and sustain the change. The communication strategy should provide guiding principles for communication messages. A message is a simple and clear idea and should summarize the essence of the change. Effective messaging means communicating the right messages through the right channels. Messages should be relevant and appropriate to the audience, and there should be continuity across the messages. Using storytelling techniques that include interesting narratives, human interest stories, and arresting imagery will assist in communicating the message to the target audience. The stakeholder group and sponsor should depict where and how information is shared within the organization. Channels for both formal and informal communication should be noted, and opportunities should be identified to include, leverage, and reinforce messaging content. Considerations in developing effective communication strategies include tailoring the communication activities to the needs, using message feedback, using push-pull interactive communications, determining the best communication strategies, vertical or horizontal, verbal, nonverbal, informal, formal, oral, written, official, unofficial, and internal, external. The communication processes within organizations can have complex structures with review and validation required by a number of groups, particularly where communications affect customers or third parties. The communication strategy should include the roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, resources, and timelines for communication content review and sign-off prior to publication. Here, your inputs will be the change definition, change impact assessment, current communication channels, tools, and methods, organizational change readiness assessment, project charter and documentation, stakeholder analysis, and vision statement, and your outputs will include a communication strategy. The purpose of developing the sponsorship strategy is to create a high-level approach for preparing and leveraging the sponsors to promote, gain support for, and drive adoption of a change. Responsibility for developing the sponsorship strategy should be assigned to the change management lead and include input from others who have knowledge of and experience with the sponsors. Stakeholders want to learn about the change and the reasons for the change from the sponsors. The importance of stakeholders' place on the change effort may be determined by the importance that sponsors demonstrate. Sponsors build support for the change at all levels of the organization. Sponsors can support identifying and mitigating risks associated with resistance to the change. Sponsors provide the resources and budget, set expectations, and hold organizations and individuals accountable during the change. Sponsors break down barriers and remove obstacles that restrict change implementation. Sponsors provide consistent high-level messaging during the change program. Sponsorship gaps that must be addressed for successful adoption of the change should be identified, and a high-level approach for addressing the gaps should be developed as early as possible. This high-level approach includes the activities to build a coalition of sponsorship that will drive and support the sponsorship strategy. Risks to consider include a lack of sponsor commitment and support for the change, sponsorship competency gaps, and past sponsorship challenges. Here, your inputs will include change risks, organizational change readiness assessment, sponsorship alignment assessment, and stakeholder analysis. Your output includes the sponsorship strategy. The purpose of develop the stakeholder engagement strategy is to identify an approach that will ensure individuals or groups impacted by a change and those who can positively affect the overall success of the change are engaged in the change effort. The core of stakeholder management and engagement includes taking the appropriate steps to identify stakeholders, conducting a stakeholder analysis, identifying the required engagement of the various stakeholders, and identifying the needs to achieve the required engagement. Change stakeholders can be numerous and range from internal stakeholders like employees whose jobs are impacted by the changes to external stakeholders like customers or clients who might see or experience something different because of the changes. A stakeholder engagement strategy may not be appropriate for all change management efforts, but in more complex, large-scale change efforts, developing an overall direction and approach for stakeholder engagement helps to align and integrate stakeholder engagement plans, activities, requirements, and metrics. Stakeholder engagement requires the attention and involvement of the people who will be impacted by the changes or who can influence the success of the changes and focuses on what the stakeholders and stakeholder groups need to know about the change and what they need to do. Good stakeholder engagement attracts and holds the attention of stakeholders to the degree needed for change success. The degree and type of stakeholder involvement required varies based on variables such as time, resource availability, negotiable elements within the future state, change management strategy, and stakeholder role. Depending on the change, a stakeholder engagement strategy should include the identification of key stakeholders, prioritization of stakeholders, references to a stakeholder analysis, required stakeholder commitments, and methods for and appropriateness of soliciting stakeholder input. Here, your inputs will be current state analysis, change impact assessment, current communication channels, tools, and methods, communication strategy, sponsorship strategy, stakeholder analysis. And your output will be stakeholder engagement strategy. The purpose of develop the change impact and readiness strategy is to define the approach, scope, roles, and responsibilities in undertaking detailed impact analysis and readiness planning for implementation of a change. Understanding the specific impacts on people, process, tools, organizational structure, job roles, and technology will inform all areas of the change strategy and is critical for developing the training strategy and readiness strategy. The readiness strategy focuses on what actions and activities need to be completed in advance of the change being implemented. It includes the readiness criteria for implementation, the governance structure, and accountability for readiness activities that will determine if the organization is ready to accept the change. Readiness management is a critical activity that supports projects meeting key pre-implementation milestones and ensures a smooth transition to new ways of working. Here, your inputs will be the stakeholder engagement strategy, change impact assessment, and your output will be the change impact and readiness strategy. The purpose of developing the learning and development strategy is to define the knowledge, skills, and competencies required for stakeholders to adopt the change, which informs creation and delivery of learning and development programs and training courses. The key components that the learning and development strategy identifies are the skills and competencies needed to perform in the changed environment, those needing training to close the competency gap, the content to be delivered, the method of delivery, and methods to determine the effectiveness of the training. The learning and development strategy should document what stakeholders must be able to do differently because of the change and how they will need to be able to work to be successful in the future state. The strategy ensures that impacted stakeholders are equipped with the necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities to achieve the future state. The learning and development strategy should define a high-level approach that ensures understanding of the intended work effort. This includes explaining different learning and development methods and tools, identifying possible resources, estimating a timeline, and identifying proposed deliverables. Beginning with identifying and explaining different learning and development methods and tools. The learning and development method is dependent upon the type of change and culture of the organization. It should identify the most effective learning and development methods and tools when defining the high-level approach. Key learning and development methods may include instructor-led, face-to-face and virtual, computer-based, webcasts and podcasts, role plays, simulations, on the job, and gamification. Some organizations have internal learning and development departments that can be leveraged to conduct the learning and development. Other organizations will rely on external consulting expertise or outsourcing to conduct these activities. The high-level approach should outline the resourcing plan to conduct the learning and development activities. A high-level plan should also include an estimated timeline for the learning and development that aligns with the project schedule. Learning and development should be close enough to the actual change that stakeholders will remember what they learned and be able to transfer the new skills to their jobs. The expected learning and development deliverables and supporting materials need to be defined in the learning and development strategy. This will establish the work effort expected to complete learning and development. Deliverables may include a learning and development plan, curriculum, and materials, and an evaluation. Key considerations in defining the learning and development approach may include license costs for training tools, commissioning training environments to deliver training of new technical or digital solutions, data used in training material and any data privacy requirements, an approach to piloting the training in advance of deployment to ensure it is fit for purpose, governance for sign off on training content, particularly if there is legal or regulatory requirement, and an approach to transitioning training from the change program to business as usual training, including knowledge transfer and management. Determine evaluation techniques. There are a wide variety of approaches and techniques to evaluate learning activities. The learning and development strategy should explain the importance of evaluating learning and development and how it should be approached. Measuring the success of a learning and development program demonstrates the participants learn the skills needed. The learning objectives should be used to define training content and measure adoption after training. Identifying the objectives of the learning and development program prior to the delivery also enables the change practitioner to evaluate adoption success after training completion. Here, your inputs will be the learning needs assessment and stakeholder analysis. Your output will be the learning and development strategy. The purpose of develop the measurement and benefit realization strategy is to define the success criteria and measures to monitor whether the change is achieving its expected benefits and to adapt the change effect as needed. It is important to begin measuring as early as possible in the life cycle of the effort. This provides timely information to gauge the effectiveness of the change strategy, keep the change implementation on track, allow for course correction, and ensure that organizational benefits defined in the project charter are realized. Develop the measurement strategy. The change objectives and goals should be used to determine what is required to achieve the future state. These targets should be specific and quantifiable for the organization to understand what is expected. Another aspect of the measurement strategy is to assess the effectiveness of the strategy used to drive the change effort itself. Common areas of focus include communication and learning to allow for refinement as needed. Techniques can include stakeholder surveys and feedback from line managers, change agents, and focus groups. Benefit realization strategy. Mechanisms must be installed to monitor the achievement of the performance targets. These mechanisms include developing the process, data collection, and reporting requirements for each measure. The components of the benefit realization strategy are assigning owners for each measure and target, determining when and how the measurement data will be collected, the reporting frequency, and how information will be shared. Creating an approach to address slippage or slow attainment of measurement. Aligning with reward strategies. Establishing timelines for addressing issues related to achieving the targets. Communicating performance targets to the organization. Here, your inputs will be strategic plan, case for change, change objectives and goals, project charter, and success criteria. Your outputs will be measurement and benefit realization strategy and a revised performance and rewards targets. The purpose of develop the sustainability strategy is to describe how the change will become part of the organization's normal functioning. It should define the high-level approach for embedding or institutionalizing the change to achieve the expected benefits and include all streams of change management activities, such as communication and engagement, metrics, tracking, performance management, rewards and recognition, learning and development, sustaining ownership, and continuous improvement. The sustainability strategy details the approach to embedding the change in the organization once the program has delivered the change. It defines the sustainability evaluation criteria including performance metrics, cultural indicators, desired employee customer behaviors, key performance indicators, scorecards, transactional volumes, exception rates, customer satisfaction scores, and employee temperature checks. It may also include sustainment activities for change support functions. The sustainability strategy defines the scope, scale, roles, responsibilities, resource requirements, accountability, and governance structure for the sustainment program. It provides a clear roadmap for maintaining the formal or informal networks or communities of practice that have supported the change initiative and outlines a long-term plan for ongoing knowledge management. Key inputs to the sustainability strategy are the lessons learned from each phase of the change program. The sustainability strategy should cover communication, metrics tracking, performance management, rewards and recognition, sustained ownership, knowledge transfer, and continuous improvement process. Here, your inputs will be the business case, change objectives and goals, change risk assessment, project charter and documentation, strategic plan, and success criteria and measures. Your output will be the sustainability strategy. To recap, the 7 pieces of the change management strategy include communications, sponsorship, stakeholder engagement, impact and readiness, learning and development, measurement and benefit realization, and sustainability. In this next video, we'll dive into section 5.3 of the standard. Thank you.